No one would have believed in the middle of the 20th century that human affairs were being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's. Yet, across the gulf of space, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded our Earth with envious eyes, slowly and surely drawing their plans against us. It did not occur to mankind that a swift fate might be hanging over us, or that from the blackness of outer space we were being scrutinized and studied, until, during a pleasant summer season,
By the third day of the calamity, those fortunate enough to have been sufficiently far away from the initial attacks fled the devastation of their once great cities for the temporary refuge of the mountains and prairies, swamps and woodlands. As the roads and highways became littered with abandoned vehicles, as fuel was exhausted and bridges destroyed, people crowded the remaining transportation or simply walked. But they continued their trek away from the invaders. Eventually, informal convoys formed. This is the story of one such caravan. As some remnants of the population of the Los Angeles basin made their way eastward into the foothills, a small National Guard detachment and a few remnants of local law enforcement managed to keep some semblance of order. The policemen, in their now tattered uniforms, did their best to present a professional police presence to help reassure the survivors that society had not collapsed and that civility was still required of all. The military detachment was made up of Marines who had orders to recover tanker trucks with their now precious cargo of gasoline. As they sought refuge away from the nightmarish sounds of the battle just across the mountains, they slowly made their way through the mountain roads. But their course, which had initially simply been one of immediate escape, was no longer a random one. For military minds, which were as cool and calculating as those of the attackers, had also been watching, and their observations would soon bear fruit. But for now, the people drove or rode or simply walked away from the terrifying sounds. As a father tries to reassure his terrified children in the back of a truck, he tells them of how he once saw such things as he marched across France in 1944, and told them not to despair, for once the madness had ended, life eventually returned to normal in that faraway land. But he also quietly wondered if France was now also under attack. A mature couple, still looking dignified despite their now tattered clothes, continued to walk with their heads held high. A passenger of a truck stands by, ready to fend off any ruffians who may try to take over their precious transport. A lone man clings to the back of a truck, while others simply ride alongside total strangers with no idea where to go or what to do next. And others simply keep walking. Among the refugees were military aviation personnel that were ordered to flee their stricken airbase after the last of their aircraft were destroyed, their commanders hoping to preserve the skills each man had for a possible future fight. An auto mechanic helps keep an old farm truck going, and his skills are now amongst the most important of all. Each person in this exodus has been ripped away from the story that was their life by an unknown attacker whose face no one has even seen. At best, perhaps a glance at the horrific weapons that attacked them. Were they aliens? Demons of the supernatural? Perhaps it was the Russians, or even angels venting God's wrath on a decadent world. Nobody knew, but everybody wondered. Hungry, tired, dirty, and terrified, they moved along with an almost drone-like demeanor. Whatever meager possessions they had on their persons was now all they had left. Military and civilians intermingled, usually offering each other what little aid and comfort they could. As they entered a large clearing, They were horrified by a new sight: the burnout remains of a small roadside motel, its inhabitants vaporized by the attackers. Clearly the attackers had already been here and moved on, but would they return? Then, although startling at first, there was the comfortingly familiar sound of a helicopter overhead. Its staccato chatter echoed off the valley walls as it settled into a clearing in front of them. Out of it stepped a small team of men, including 2 military policemen and a distinguished-looking middle-aged man in a perfect uniform. Perhaps these men had some morsel of information for the haggard mass, for everyone craved information as much as they needed food and water. A few of the military officers and policemen went forth to speak with these men from the helicopter. The man in charge was a National Guard 2-star general, and he did have much to say. The military, finding its weapons useless against such technology and having realized its inability to stave off this destruction, expanded its mission, prioritizing aiding and directing the seeming countless caravans of shocked and exhausted people. They commandeered as many strategic assets as they could find, mostly food, fuel, and medicine. With the regular armed forces still valiantly trying to slow the advance of the attackers, the National Guard was assigned the task of aiding an expected tidal wave of refugees. The mission in this area was under command of the general who stood before them. An architect by profession, this bespectacled man understood the need for clear, calm thinking and organization. He began setting up remote way stations with very basic medical facilities, food and water distribution, and fuel for the few vehicles that had made it thus far. With the aid of whatever civilian law enforcement could be mustered, he quickly arranged for a system to be set up. The police, backed up by the military, would direct and control the civilian population. His hope was that the use of civilian police would help reassure the people and add some small modicum of normalcy in the minds of the survivors. As more people told their stories and more observations were made, a picture began to emerge. The invaders, for all of their immense intellect and technology, were prone to predictable patterns. The military commanders may have lacked the weapons to defeat their enemies, but their strategic minds were finding deep flaws in the attackers' plan. In time, it was revealed that these mysterious agents of destruction were not operating like an invasion force by taking and holding ground, but more like an exterminator trying to wipe out an infestation. Once they had sanitized an area, they moved on, never to return. The general decided the best way to save lives was to find areas that the attackers had already been through and establish camps there. As a result, people were sent that way and the military supported them as best it could. Since it was abundantly clear that the attackers had already been through this area, it was decided that this would be the best place to make camp. Supplies were trucked in here and at other remote outposts along the ever-expanding river of refugees. Connected by radio, these outposts also served as collection points for information and intelligence. Food and water were quickly distributed, supplies collected and guarded, and minor improvements were made to the last standing structure to be used as an aid station. Communications were set up, and patrols were sent out to scout the area, as well as forward observation posts to give early warning should the attackers return. The food and water, along with the badly needed rest, buoyed the people's spirits. The semblance of order and structure gave them comfort, and the sight of low-flying fighter jets streaking towards the battle gave them hope. There were many pilots in their group who could not help but notice that they did not see all of the planes return. As night fell, people slept in their clothes with their shoes on, lest they be required to flee on short notice. Despite their fatigue, sleep came with difficulty, for during the night, the sounds and eerie lights of the battle across the mountains raged on. Men's imaginations had to be reined in, as every flash of light seemed to briefly illuminate a nightmare. Sleep came with the darkness, and darkness came with the sleep. next morning, the word came. The decision was made to use the bomb. The idea of using the atomic bomb on American soil had seemed inconceivable only a few days before. Scientists had discovered another weakness in the attackers, and it was not the blast, but the EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, that was output from an atomic blast. They thought that this would destroy the attackers, or at least their machines. Los Angeles, virtually annihilated at this point and still a major area of concentration for the attackers, was chosen. There was also a fear that if this failed, that once the attackers were finished sanitizing the city, they may return to the mountains to follow up on their work. So people would not be safely sheltered by the mountains. Ergo, the order was given for them to face east until after the blast. Many of them sought cover wherever they could find it. It would be some time before the results of the atomic bomb blast could be determined, so the people should be made ready to move in case the bomb was to fail. Vehicles were fueled and loaded with what provisions could be mustered. The people were warned and prepared, and then it was time.
Attention, stand by. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It took some time for the sound to reach the mountains. Once the blast had cleared, everyone mounted the vehicles prepared to move out. Had the bomb worked? Then the radio calls slowly began to come in. The machines fell, never to rise again, but all was not secure. Since the people could not return yet, the decision was made to set up the local stations as refugee camps while the military assessed the situation, but at least a further evacuation would not be required. It was learned that aside from the radiation, a new threat was looming. The attackers' ships had failed, but many of the attackers, scared and hungry, had begun fighting outside of their vehicles. Rumors circulated of the zombified dead being reanimated to fight humans. Other rumors spread about giant monsters, like the one Russia had unleashed on Germany in 1946. There were even wilder rumors of mutated sea creatures ravaging the city. Other stories claimed there were mutated zoo animals on the loose that had fled into the woods and upwards toward the mountains. And all of this was made worse by every manner of terrifying sound that pierced the following night's sky. The explosions of bombs and artillery continued throughout the night as the army kept up its fight in the city. Terrifying shadows reflected on the clouds above the city, which was now a hellscape. Rumors and imaginations ran wild. The outposts were fully manned and a defensive perimeter tightened. But the night passed with little more than frayed nerves and wild imaginations. At daybreak, more assets eventually joined the camp. Helicopter reconnaissance dispelled the stories of giant monsters and zombies in the streets, but the aliens were still fighting as foot soldiers. There were battles still being fought in the city, but this was a threat the military could fight. Yet there was one constant fear that the attackers may break through and follow the exodus of refugees into the hills. The camp was reinforced as much as humanly possible. The battle against the attackers could be heard echoing throughout the next night as well. Everyone had a finger by the trigger. But within the week, the days had become routine, and the nights were becoming ever more quiet, eventually having little more than the chirping of crickets. It was over, and we had won. The guns eventually grew silent, and the word was sent that the enemy was defeated. The radiation levels outside the hot zone were low enough for human occupation, and the enemy had been totally neutralized. People could return home, or to what was left of it. But there was another threat waiting for them upon their return. Without a working government and no infrastructure, the people had to be on guard to protect themselves from themselves. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No one would have believed in the middle of the 20th century that human affairs were being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's. Yet, across the gulf of space, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded our Earth with envious eyes, slowly and surely drawing their plans against us. It did not occur to mankind that a swift fate might be hanging over us, or that from the blackness of outer space we were being scrutinized and studied, until, during a pleasant summer season,
By the third day of the calamity, those fortunate enough to have been sufficiently far away from the initial attacks fled the devastation of their once great cities for the temporary refuge of the mountains and prairies, swamps and woodlands. As the roads and highways became littered with abandoned vehicles, as fuel was exhausted and bridges destroyed, people crowded the remaining transportation or simply walked. But they continued their trek away from the invaders. Eventually, informal convoys formed. This is the story of one such caravan. As some remnants of the population of the Los Angeles basin made their way eastward into the foothills, a small National Guard detachment and a few remnants of local law enforcement managed to keep some semblance of order. The policemen, in their now tattered uniforms, did their best to present a professional police presence to help reassure the survivors that society had not collapsed and that civility was still required of all. The military detachment was made up of Marines who had orders to recover tanker trucks with their now precious cargo of gasoline. As they sought refuge away from the nightmarish sounds of the battle just across the mountains, they slowly made their way through the mountain roads. But their course, which had initially simply been one of immediate escape, was no longer a random one. For military minds, which were as cool and calculating as those of the attackers, had also been watching, and their observations would soon bear fruit. But for now, the people drove or rode or simply walked away from the terrifying sounds. As a father tries to reassure his terrified children in the back of a truck, he tells them of how he once saw such things as he marched across France in 1944, and told them not to despair, for once the madness had ended, life eventually returned to normal in that faraway land. But he also quietly wondered if France was now also under attack. A mature couple, still looking dignified despite their now tattered clothes, continued to walk with their heads held high. A passenger of a truck stands by, ready to fend off any ruffians who may try to take over their precious transport. A lone man clings to the back of a truck, while others simply ride alongside total strangers with no idea where to go or what to do next. And others simply keep walking. Among the refugees were military aviation personnel that were ordered to flee their stricken airbase after the last of their aircraft were destroyed, their commanders hoping to preserve the skills each man had for a possible future fight. An auto mechanic helps keep an old farm truck going, and his skills are now amongst the most important of all. Each person in this exodus has been ripped away from the story that was their life by an unknown attacker whose face no one has even seen. At best, perhaps a glance at the horrific weapons that attacked them. Were they aliens, demons of the supernatural? Perhaps it was the Russians, or even angels venting God's wrath on a decadent world. Nobody knew, but everybody wondered. Hungry, tired, dirty. Well, hello everybody, and we're going live. Can you guys hear me okay? It takes a second for you to get your response back to me. This shows my microphone's working all right, but I always like to get a sound check from you guys. Hey Garfield, glad you made it. Oh, Cam, Imano, Garfield's here, Needham, Sergeant 7, great guys. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Hello, yep, okay, great, you can hear me, that's wonderful. Whole bunch of cool things to talk about today, and including some new developments. And I think you guys are going to get a tickle out of some of this. So I guess I'll kick off with the big news. Sorry, I did have a hot tea this time, but sometimes it's still. Oh, Mike, you're here, wonderful. Mike, I'm glad you're here because guys, Mike Bashat from Celebrating Aviation's with us, and because there's some things I want to talk about. I hope you guys have been following his videos because they're outstanding, and I'm really getting a kick out of them. I want to reiterate a few things that he talked about with color. In fact, I kind of need to get up with you, Mike, about I need to learn a little bit more about colors. You guys, when you were in school, did you guys remember having something they call them tempera paints? You got like 6 colors, which are the basic colors, like black, white, I think it was brown, red, blue, and yellow, I think. And they taught you how to mix any color from those colors. But I was thinking about it the other day because I was thinking about color palettes. For when we make our models, you can manipulate the photographs. Well, since I use chroma key, green screen, on some of the images, if you want to set a mood, well, we'll just go ahead and jump into this now. if I want to set a mood or something, you can use things like texturing and grain to make the photos look old of your models. But the sky and the lighting really set the mood. It's really hard to have an intense scene if everything's got bright Technicolor to it in a crystal blue sky. If you can do in one of Mike's recent videos, he was talking about artists like Jack Linwood, who's my personal favorite, the grandfather of box art artists, how he would use these unusual colors, greens and yellows and things. But one of my 10 favorite, in my little video on 10 favorite box arts, was I believe it was the Aurora F9F Cougar, and it had this basically unrealistic pink and sky and everything behind it, but it was just, it grabbed your attention and it held it. It was very inspiring, makes you want to buy the kit. So by the same token, when we're photographing our models, if we're going to put in, if you're going to chroma key or set the lighting or even color a background, things like picking these colors, and I use this a lot in the diorama video, I deliberately looked for kind of unusual colors that would give this kind of creepy, ethereal feel to the images. None of that was by accident, except for the one spot where I forgot to chroma key it out, which, if you happen to catch that in the loop I just ran, and I'll run it again at the end, I fixed that. And I used a mask instead of a chroma key on that. That's another option. And hey, Steve, glad you made it. So I need to have a chat with Mike about that. Being a professional artist, he understands that far better than I do. I'm just kind of, well, that sort of looks good, but I'm sure there are certain colors that instill certain, I guess, emotions. When I did my science fair project back in high school, somebody said use a dark royal blue for your background, I had this big wooden background for my ejection seat science fair project. And the reason that they said that was that research has shown that, dark blue backgrounds set this type of mood, which is really good when you're trying to do a presentation. It's not as intimidating as black, and it doesn't have distracting as white. So there's a psychology to colors. So if you're going to photograph your models, and there's also psychology to lighting. And I'm not saying I know that much about it. What I'm saying is that if you want to photograph your models in diorama form and you want to set a certain tone, it helps to do a little research to get the lighting and the sky and the background colors to set, because it's just like music sets a tone. A long time ago, I did a gag. I took the exact same footage and put 3 different pieces of music to it, and it solicited 3 entirely different reactions. Because on one condition, it can be funny, another it would be sad, and another it would be, something else. I forget what it was. But anyway, so I think I need to do a little research on that, and maybe that might make a good video to put out one morning or something. Always afraid that thing's gonna fall on me. Anyway, that was something I thought about, and we all know that, like for example, pre-shading models, the subtlety of colors makes a huge difference, and sometimes you get these happy accidents. But when I was pre-shading those characters that Mark Tyler sent me, those race car drivers, I primed them, then I used black to pre-shade the dark areas, and I painted them, and none of it showed through. And apparently I had put the paint on just a little too thick, and it completely blotted out the pre-shading. And so when we're painting models, if we don't want something pastel colored, there's more of a science to it. No matter how many models I build, I never get the exact same thing to happen the exact same way twice. But you can control some of that when if you take pictures. If you get it in your computer and you have any kind of editing software, you can play with that. You can do a lot with it. A lot of you guys have commented, yes, I deliberately desaturated the images because I wanted to give them that older feel, and also when you looked at the pictures just in bright, almost Technicolor, it was too happy and bright, and it didn't set the mood. But you desaturate it, and all of a sudden it has a more serious feel to it. So anyway, something I wanted to tell you guys about, kind of a big deal. You guys probably heard me talk about Mike Mullane's book, Riding Rockets, the other day. And as the fates would have it, after I made that video, I thought it was a courtesy. I would just shoot him an email with a link. Well, he contacted me. And he was happy to have the shout out for the book. I'm like, glad to do it. And he made an offer that I intend to take him up on. He was like, if the viewership would like to do like a Zoom video and ask some questions. Now, I don't have the commercial grade Zoom. I just have the free download. But so if you guys want to ask an astronaut a question, then Mike Mullane flew 3 missions in the space shuttle. 2 of them were secret government missions that he can't really talk that much about even today. But anyway, send maxsmodels@yahoo.com. Shoot me your questions, and just, if you would, just so I can keep them together, just label like space or space question, something like that, just so I can. I'll. He's watching the Army Navy game today, so he's not here on the live stream. But hey, John, you made it great. Bill, you were. Oh, that's great, wonderful. I have some feedback with the audio. All right, let me make sure I've got everything turned down. Volume is off. My telephone is off. All right, let me tell you what. Let me turn the gain down a little bit. Is that helping at all? I had that last time, and I had everything turned down, so it's not like there's anything here that's repeating it. Make sure I have the telephone turned off. Anyway, shoot those questions to me if you have a question for a 3-time shuttle astronaut, and I'll put them all together, and I'll see if I can arrange a Zoom video with him, and we'll address your questions. I do. If you're all a space person, you gotta read Riding Rockets, because man, he does not mince words. It's really a refreshing read. There's no propaganda in here. Kind of quite the contrary. Thanks, Chris. Reverb off. We're gonna make a little. First, I'm going to put on my up-close glasses. I'm going to turn the gain down a little bit. Sometimes if the gain's up too high, it picks up everything. Is this any better, or is this worse?
It's fine now.
You listen? Okay. I have my audio technician back here listening to it, so okay. Yeah, I just had the gain up a little too high. And again, from the top, Mike Mullane, the astronaut, did respond to me personally, and he said, if you want, have your people send some questions, and I'll try and arrange a Zoom video with him and answer your questions that you would ask a shuttle astronaut. He was an astronaut for about 12 years. And you guys probably already know, because I talked about it before. This is a replica Apollo 15 watch that I wear. My wife got me. And this is like what Dave Scott wore in Valley of Taurus Littrow. And one of the things that made it hard for me to read this book, but not being a space guy. I've only met a handful of astronauts. I've met Sam Gaymar. I met the late Al Worden, John Blaha, and the late Bruce McCandless before he'd gone up in space. Anyway, point I'm getting at is I've only met a handful of these guys, and only one Apollo astronaut, and none of the moonwalkers. But being a kid of the space program, they might as well, as far as you're concerned, they walk on water. But the old saying, never meet your heroes. And just because of their of the missions they flew, a couple of my heroes were like Gene Cernan, who had been to the moon twice, walked once. Dave Scott, who I stood next to but did not get to talk to. Same thing, walked on the moon, again, replica of his watch. And of course, John Young, because he flew 6 missions and he flew everything except Apollo. But I'd seen interviews with Young before, and as much as you might admire them as heroes, like they say, never meet your heroes, because it didn't seem like somebody'd make it was like, I'm not sure this is somebody you'd want to hang out and drink beer with. And the book gets into that and sort of pokes a hole in here. I mean, as astronaut missions go, as astronauts go, their record speaks for itself. Their place in history is secure, but that takes off the shine of the hero worship kind of gets away when you realize it. But as people, they're still people with all the flaws and problems. But I'll let you read the book and it gets into that. And also, in fact, I think I might have a picture of it here. A couple of years ago, we went on a family vacation. We went to the Intrepid Museum, and this is me by the Enterprise. That is the actual Enterprise on the Intrepid. And the reason I'm shifting back to models here, the reason I wanted to show you this picture was you can see all the tiles on it. And I wanted to use a photo of my own instead of a stock photograph. And as you guys probably are aware, that the Enterprise was not made to go into space flight. It was strictly an atmospheric test vehicle. It's the one that did the first separation. I remember seeing it live on television when it did its first separation, its glide test. I think Fred Hayes was at the controls with, I forget who else. It might have been Crippen, but anyway, or it could have been Young. Anyway, point being that the tiles on this thing are extremely delicate, even though they're unbelievably heat resistant. And there's some really good stories in this book also about those tiles. But getting back to models, if you model this thing, I don't know how anybody can, especially if it's like a 1 to 144 scale, anybody can get any details on those tiles. But when you look at the shuttle, you realize that those tiles kind of are the shuttle. I mean, they're delicate. What they call it, the glass airplane or something like that, because they were so fragile. But if you're going to build a shuttle, even though the basic outline of the thing is fairly straightforward, the details on it were like the hardest thing you could do. I don't know how anybody could. I forget how many tens of thousands of those things, and every one of them, you can't really see it in this photograph, but every single one of them has a number on it, goes in one direction, it has to be glued exactly in place. I mean, it's the world's ultimate jigsaw puzzle. And that alone gives you an idea why this thing was never really it was always experimental. It was never really truly an operational vehicle like a regular airplane. But if you can model one and get all of those, I mean, I thought the gantry for the shuttle was complicated, but I imagine somebody might have a decal sheet. But you look at the subtle change in color and how many, and the complexity of that pattern, that would be an insane thing to try and get to accurately represent. I'm not sure how you could do it. And by comparison, here in the same museum, that's my brother-in-law Jose. That's a replica Mercury capsule, which is one of the easiest things in the world to model. And I have that big 112 Atomic City Mercury capsule on my shelf, and of course it dominates the shelf. In fact, let's see, that's my little tiny 1 to 48 scale one right there. Where's my big one? believe it's this one. Yeah. Now that is a beautiful model. If you're all into space and you have some place to put it, I highly recommend the Atomic City kit. This is it. I think that was the first model I ever got in the Fine Scale Modeler website. Didn't make the magazine. It's a very easy kit to build. The interior is incredibly detailed. I didn't put the interior in it because I wasn't going to make it where you could see it. This is Glenn's Friendship 7. You do have to do some cutting on it. Al Shepard's Mercury had a round porthole window, so you have to do some cutting on it and insert a piece if you want Shepard's. But it's an easy model to paint because of the large scale. You can pre-paint most of the stuff, just about everything. It really goes together well. So when you're dealing with a space program, you go from the easiest models to paint in detail, and it has a really good decal sheet, very thorough, including all the instruments. It's really a surprisingly easy model for even a relative novice to make look nice. And there's rumor keeps floating around that they're going to come up with a a Gemini capsule to go with it, and they do. I'll certainly get one, but I've also heard that that's fantasy. That's not happening. The only problem with this thing is you can tell it completely dominates the shelf. And as I talked about with rockets, if you want to display them, they eat up a surprising amount of real estate going up, even though they have a small footprint. And you're surprised how fast they'll fill up a glass cabinet, because you have to take most of the shelves out to make room for them. And putting them horizontally, although it works, it just doesn't look the same. Personally, I think they lose a lot of their grandeur. Richard says, I've seen the decals for the shuttle. I need to get a large scale shuttle decal sheet, just take a look at it just for my own edification, because on the smaller scale, obviously you're just going to paint it black and white, but you get a larger scale where you could make those shuttle tiles show. And if you can make the tiles on the shuttle show, then that really does make it pop. It takes, I don't like to use the word boring lines away from it. It just makes it so much more interesting. And speaking of models, there's something else they had at the Intrepid. A lot of times when you tour, by the way, this is in a pavilion up on the deck of the Intrepid. There's no way they could get the shuttle below deck. It wouldn't fit, obviously. So they had to build this inside that pavilion up on top. But most of the time when you visit a ship, somewhere in there you'll see this incredible model of the ship on display. And the one on the Intrepid is a Lego model. And you can tell by the size of the person standing next to it just how big this thing is. And it's impressive. And at first I went, man, a Lego model, are you kidding? But when I started looking at it, I started realizing, even though it's Legos, they put a lot of detail into it. And that is an impressive model, even if it is Legos. It counts. Anyway, so yeah, but once again, if you're into space, I highly recommend that Atomic City Mercury capsule. I don't know why it's a very popular kit. I don't know why they haven't made some others. Of course, that's an MRC Atomic City thing. That's some kind of weird merger. I don't know the whole story, and I haven't been able to find out the whole story behind how they got this one kit made and then no others. I haven't seen any other mergers with MRC and Atomic City, which might be more of a marketing agreement. I think there were some kind of contracts between them. That kit's kind of a one-off in its own world. I really haven't been able to find out what the story was on that. By the way, there is also, you guys will recall that if you saw the video, I broke my H-19 helicopter, dropping it after I dropped it and broke 2 landing gears off after I took the very last photo. And Richard Foy, MRC's a deal maker. That sounds right. I'm thinking Atomic City may have independently come up with the molds for it, and then Armory say, hey, we'll market it for you. Yeah, you're right, Garfield. Legos are huge, and you can make some impressive stuff with them. I understand that Lego Death Star is supposed to be a real nightmare to put together. Well, anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that the H-19, I told you I was putting it back together. Well, there it is on the shelf. The landing gear repair held. Those are the 2 broken gears facing us. And, of course, I'm extremely delicate with it. But it did, the repairs did go well. And those little speckles you see on it are the ones I had talked about that where when I was 4 feet away and facing another direction when I used that paint that has the little bits of gravel in it, and they bounced that far and stuck, and they're surprisingly difficult to get off. They adhere surprisingly well. So I was like, you know what? I'll just write it off as, chip paint and leave it alone. At some point I might get in there, but this is one of those things where you can do more damage trying to fix it. And since they have texture, painting over it won't do the trick because you'll see the bump. So just amazing the weird little things that happen by accident that you could never get to do on purpose. But the helicopter is repaired and on the shelf. In fact, I have been repairing most of the kits that I use in the diorama. Got broken because we all know how much models love to be handled. So I got all my infantrymen fixed, and they're all ready for service. And also got the trucks I got the trucks fixed and got them all little pieces that got knocked off, so they're back in one piece again and doing well. That's something else. Now, I wanted to talk about the chroma key, and I did just real quick. One of the problems, if you guys do decide to use chroma key, I only did it this way because I was so crowded in the garage. But if you are going to do that, try to move whatever you're taking the photos of at least 7 feet away from the green screen or the red screen. Having it up close like that causes a ton of reflection and bleed, and it's really going to mess up your it's going to make it much more difficult to chroma key things out. I just wanted to point that out, just to let you know that although this is the way I did it out of necessity, it's really not the way you want to do it. Got the Glencoe space station up. You know, if you're a 50s space kid, this is a must-have. It's just, I mean, it's a Von Braun design. It is such an easy kit to build, and I think it looks cool hanging on the ceiling. I've been meaning to put up a satellite. That's why I bought that space operations center that I detest. It fell through, but this thing, it goes together easily. You can paint it. You know, just primarily a little bit of trim paint on some of the piping and stuff really makes it pop, and it looks good hanging up. Those decals actually came from a different model, but I thought they were perfect for it. And if I get around to making a sequel to the video, this is going to play a role in it. As I had mentioned earlier, the Glencoe lunar module, it's just perfect as for the to be the bad guy ship. If you know, it hardly, I mean, I'll probably put some accoutrements on it, but it looks the part. It basically looks steampunk, and it looks like fluorescent decals. Well, that makes it easier to film, because I might actually take it out and film it at night against natural sky, or if you film it against green screen, it makes it easier for the shadows to show, but not get messed up when you chroma key it. A lot of advantages to a bright color like that. And it's just so awesomely retro and cool. And more pictures of the patent. Well, let's see. I think I might actually be able to accommodate you there. Well, let's see. Yeah, there it is. And by the way, there was somebody had left a comment that this was not actually a patent but a Pershing. So I went and did a little research, and from what I can tell, somebody had said that it was an Aurora Pershing that they had mistakenly put in as an M46 patent. So I went and did a little research, and from what I can find out, that is an M46. For one thing, it has I think it's the M4A1 gun on it, which is the Pershing had a different muzzle brake, and a few other differences, and of course a lot of internal differences. So if what my research showed is correct, that is actually a patent, not a mislabeled Pershing. And so that was just one comment somebody had left, so I went and looking into it. And oh, Mark, you made it. Great. Mark, if it's okay with you, when I'm done here, I'm going to put a link to that video you sent me. Guys, Mark did a big collection of Aurora World War I aircraft, almost the whole series, and he did a nice video talking about them. Yeah, I agree, Chris. It's a patent, and of course, certainly easy to make a mistake. Ah, Bruce, you're here. Great. So, Bruce, I have a question for you. The girl who sent those models you sent me, the girl who gave me the Thunderbolt and that other stuff, I actually put it on the table, started on it last night. Her name was Melissa, right? Because I was going to name the airplane after her. So I want to make sure I use the right name, and I'm trying to dig through emails you told me, but it's a Hawk kit, which is, I actually have pictures and parts I'm going to talk about in a little while. Yeah, John, the definitely, it looks, the only way I can tell externally is the muzzle brake. And to my knowledge, that model M46 is the only time we use that bell-shaped muzzle brake. Okay, guys, when I'm done here, I'm going to put a link to Mark's video, and he did a real nice video on all of the World War I Aurora kits he's built, and he's done a real nice job on them. Sorry, I have a question. I was talking about airbrushing Iwata. Is it worth the extra money? I like my Iwatas. I've had Badgers and I've had Iwatas. They both work. I've never regretted the money I've spent on an Iwata. I'll put it that way. Yeah, Miss Melissa. Okay. I'm going to make a note of that real quick. So, P47, Miss Melissa. All right. Oh, very good, very good. Okay, so, what was the other thing I wanted to talk about? Let's see. Take that down, and let's take that down. Ooh, look, it's me. Yay! I also have, my wife got me the big Iwata, the one with the big can on top, that and it'll do a 1/32 scale model in about 7 seconds. It's incredible. I don't use it that often because it's big, but I sort of, you could paint a real car with it. Yeah, no, I agree. Fishing with Bob. No, I think you'll find it a big improvement. Now you gotta practice with it. Find some cheap models or some sheet plastic or anything, but play with it. One thing I've learned, you've got to pull the needle out and clean it after every use. So you're cleaning an airbrush when you're done with it. And I bought some of that Tamiya cleaner. It doesn't take a lot. It does an amazing job. Yeah, I like my Badger too. I just I didn't take good enough care of it, and I beat it up. Now I have a Patriot 105 and the big one, and I still have the parts to my Badger. But one of the problems was something in it broke, and after a while, I don't think it was my first real double action airbrush. I didn't take good enough care of it, and I paid for it. Yeah, I haven't heard too many good things about about Testors Aztecs. Let's see. I did get this recently. That is a Hallmark ornament of, I don't care what you say. I'm calling it Baby Yoda. I just don't care for the name Grogu. But I think I'd mentioned, I finally found the Razor Crest. Hasbro's supposed to be coming out with a large scale one, but it's $350 or $400. And although that won't stop me from getting one, but we found this at Hallmark and just had to get it. They were only selling one per customer, and I know it's not a model, but it's kind of in the same vein. But in case you guys have not seen The Mandalorian, I don't want to spoil it. But the Razor Crest, the model they're making of looks cool, and that's all I'm going to say with that, because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. Now the other thing, look at proud uncle. That's right, nephew Yoda, baby Yoda, nephew Yoda. The other thing was, speaking of that Hawk P47, this is one of the trees, and I'd forgotten how much bloody flash old vintage kits tend to come with, but this one was bad even by the standards of the day. And this was after I'd trimmed a bunch of stuff off. So now, of course, it trims off very, very easily. And Hawk has two colors. Some of the parts are black and some of the parts are white. And it has, you can notice right down there on the top of the box, there's a turtle deck. It has two turtle decks. You can make either D model out of it, Razorback D model or a bubble top D model. And since I have a Razorback on the shelf, I'm going to make a bubble top out of this one. And given all the modern kits I've worked with, I tended to forget that these are very old molds, and this is an original kit too. And so even when those molds were new, they had issues. And if you look at the very top of the tree up there, you see a landing gear just covered in flash. And you tend to forget how primitive, although they look good, if you can still do a good job with them, you tend to forget just how basic and primitive some of these kits were. And but they go together pretty easily. There's virtually no cockpit detail. In fact, I couldn't even find a pilot figure, but I've got so many of them that's not a problem. And But when you know, we all talk about, oh, I remember the kits I built as a kid, and then you go get one, and you're, oh, I forgot how crappy they could be at times. So if you've been building a lot of modern kits and you do get one of these old ones, just don't get shocked when you open it up and go, what? I just thought that was, which kind of segues into the next thing to talk about. Someone wanted to talk about repurposing stuff when you're building models, not just parts of kits, but when you things that you can use on a model. For example, a chain, like, for a cheap necklace, makes a great anchor chain for a model ship. Things like that. And Lindbergh kits had the struts outside of the wheel well. Wonderful. Everybody's got their little tricks they pull. Certain kinds of chain they use for, like, the chains on tanks, things like that. And I figured all you guys probably had your little, and I'm sure Bruce, because you build ships, so you've got to have things that, I know shipbuilding is probably one of the, especially like sailing vessels, is probably one of the hobbies where people have more than the average number of little tricks they pull, things they can use that look right on scale when you put them on a ship for turnbuckles and things like that. In fact, I think I remember you talking about in some of your videos. So I thought you guys might want to share some ideas for that. Paintbrush furls make good tailpipes for racing. There you go. See, exactly that kind of thing. With me, one of the things that's come in real handy is those little stirs. The little hollow straws, the real tiny ones. They come in handy for everything from exhaust pipes to piping to tubing to greeblies. A lot of people buy stock plastic. Next time you go to Starbucks, just grab a handful of those stir sticks. They're hollow and they're easy to work with, and I've used them for so many things I've lost track. Let's see. Apropos of, I'm just reading some of the comments. Oh yeah, things like buttons can become shields for gladiators or Vikings, and it's amazing how many. The one thing I've learned is the flimsier the cloth, the thinner and flimsier it is, the easier it is because it scales down well to make anything from raincoats to pup tents. Sprues are about, oh yeah, I've got a huge box of nothing but leftover sprues, and whether you're melting them down to make wires, it's just like rigging a model airplane. There's two schools of thoughts on rigging model airplanes, like biplanes. Some people like to stretch sprue, so they have something hard to work with. Other people prefer to use like easy line or fishing line and actually rig it. I've never been able to get it right. I've got a couple. I recently got that other swordfish, and I want to do a nice job on it. And I rigged the other one, the Novo kit, which was, it was okay. It was certainly, there was some flash and you can see some rough castings, but overall, I mean, not. I had a lot of fun. It was actually a challenge to build it. I made the challenge harder by trying to fold the wings, which I did. But this one, I'm going to put on its wheels with the wings. And oh, by the way, that as you notice, the floats were canted out because it was just the way the parts were molded. They just didn't fit the way they're supposed to. Well, this one's going to go on its wheels and with the wings out, but I am going to have to rig it. And so there's going to be a chance for me to practice my rigging. I thought about getting a pin vise and drilling little holes and just, lacing fishing line all the way through it, and that might work. Nice thing about that is you don't have to anchor it down on the two ends. So we'll see how that works, but it's going to take a level of patience. Let's see. I think, oh my gosh, did I already use all the slides that I had? I'm just going to put that up here just to have something besides my smiling face to look at. Gosh, you think you put a bunch of pictures up here, and when you start chatting, you go through them so quick. So, man, that thing looks stinking. And this is actually what an early idea of a lunar module is going to look like, by the way. This isn't something somebody just sat around a room fantasized about. This was drawn up by engineers. And when you get right down to it, if you look at the actual lunar module, it's kind of this thing just rearranged. And because if you were to peel the skin off of that thin skin off a lunar module, what you're going to find inside are a bunch of circular tanks all over the place. Oh yeah, I can imagine, Raymond, that all kinds of electronic greeblies would look great. In fact, when you think about it, the skin of the Millennium Falcon looks like an early printed circuit board. Clear sprue makes great 135 scale block. There you go. Okay, I use a pen vise and drill through ankle on figures, then superglue in electric guitar strings. And stick it to my cork figure holder. Well, that's interesting. All kinds of cool stuff. Now, by the way, guys, when I'm done here today, I'm going to leave this running. I'll probably just put the intro and let it loop. But a lot of you guys had asked that you since you like chatting with each other, I am going to. Oh, thank you.
It's so cold.
A little hot chocolate. But I'm going to leave it going so you guys can chat amongst yourselves for a while. Those of you who saw yesterday's show, the cat has to go to the vet, and oh, that's a joy. She's a fighter. And I don't care how many of those little happy snacks you give her. She sees. I mean, we have to pull trickery and skullduggery to get her in that box. And anyway. Yeah. It's kind of, believe it or not, it's kind of cold here in Florida, and I realize, I know some of you guys are shoveling snow out of your driveway. Quit whining. I'm talking about by local standards. Fishing with Bob. That's one of the reasons that this whole thing has happened is that everybody here is just, they're great. They're here because they want to be. Everybody has the same hobby, the same passion for these things, and if there's one thing a lot of modelers like to do, it's help other modelers. And I don't mean, that I'm better than you, look what I can do. I mean, they genuinely enjoy helping other people. I've tried to corrupt some young minds by giving them models. And that's a tricky thing because saw a cat carry out on television. That's new. Soft pouch. How could it call? Oh, you'd be surprised. Now, in Florida, we call it cold when it drops below 50, but it does get below freezing here. We do have problems with frozen pipes. They've had freezes down in South Florida that have wiped out entire orange crops. And in fact, if you remember the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, they're talking about they're in the commodities market. And they're talking about whether or not they are going to there's going to be a freeze in Florida, so they're trying to corner the concentrated frozen orange juice market. John, I've done the same thing. I have a big piece of styrofoam, and a lot of times I have a lot of brushes and stuff, or I've painted something on a stick. I just stick it in the styrofoam. A sheet of styrofoam and toothpicks or something that you can just stick things in and let them dry is really handy. Wall Street, the last great bastion of pure capitalism. That's my favorite line from that movie. Facebook's got a lot of modelers groups. Some of them deal in selling models. Some of them work like as exchanges. And some of them are just so you can showcase your model. And I joined a couple of them, but I was getting so much stuff in my feed I couldn't keep it all straight. And none of it really applied to me that much. So I was just like, it's okay. One of the nice things about my Facebook page is it doesn't get a lot of traffic. So when you guys put something there, most likely I'm going to see it. And that makes life a lot simpler. This whole thing is what I call right-sized. It's small enough that I can keep most of keep things organized. I can answer emails normally. Normally, if you send me an email or at least something that would solicit a response or make a Facebook post, I can at least give you a thumbs up to let you know that I read it. But because we're a small enough group that we can still keep that personal touch. And since I don't monetize this channel, then hey, that's great. I don't need 10,000 people hitting me with emails every day that I'd never get a chance to even read. Because you're looking at Max's models, it be me, and with the occasional help of my wife when she does things like maybe nice hot chocolate. Okay. Yeah. One thing I did have a problem with the styrofoam was it flopping over. So either tack it down or make sure it's wide enough and put stuff in the center. It's surprising. You have what you think's a big piece of styrofoam. You stick something on, but you forget how light it is. It doesn't take much for it to topple over. And by the way, speaking of books, Mike Mullane said he was going to send me an autographed copy of his book. And Rick, I want to thank you again for sending this to me. That I really appreciate it. But I also got Tom Daniel had sent me his book on drawing the old school way. I mean, come on, guys. You got to be impressed. I realize he uses tools and stuff, but still. I don't care how much I practice. I ain't never going to be that good. But these professional artists, and Mike, if you're still here, I'm sure you can appreciate this. You got to have your tools. I had some of this stuff when I was in my creative drawing class in college. And I thought about getting back into it. I mean, look at all they go through just to draw a barrel. But, the human eye can pick up things that are wrong. So, you realize that these are hand-drawn bumpers. I mean, that's the level of meticulousness that goes into this. I read this book and I just like, geez. That's why I have so much respect for the artists that can draw these things. And this is just getting into the drawing. That's not even getting into the color palettes and everything. And the artwork that goes in to I recently did that video on Brad Leisure, who's a currently working artist. And not only that they're doing it, but they're doing it on, 18-inch, 20-inch palettes. And then when you get past all that, there are different styles. Do you want to have the old school style? Do you want to make it look? You want it to look hyper realistic? And then of course that doesn't even touch on the people now these days like Kelly Daniel that are doing, which is Tom's son, who are doing digital art. And I imagine there's probably, I'm guessing there's use CAD and get a 3D printer. Oh God, Lord. All right. I was going to say, I imagine there's a little bit of I don't want to use the word turf battle, but I imagine that the guys who use gouache and paintbrushes and pencils and versus the guys who use computers, and not that one can't do the other, but I'm assuming that there's, because Brad does both, and he was kind of forced to, and we even talked about it in his thing that turned out to be a handy thing because he had to learn a new skill, but. I'm kind of wondering if some of the old school artists don't look at the whole computer thing as, those kids in their darn Facebook, interweb, or if they're kind of like, nope, art is art. When I took art class, our teacher was, you can't cheat in art unless you, take credit. The only way you can cheat in art is take credit for something you didn't do. And since I consider model building a form of artwork, I just don't see how you can cheat building a model. If you built the model, you built the model. I don't care what the technique was. If you go, well, I cheated by doing this. No, that was just your technique. And I was watching that video where they manufacture the HO scale model trains in China. And the guys have this brass mold and they shove the body of the locomotive in there and they just hit it with paint. And brass is so malleable and can be, or not malleable, but malleable and can be made to have such a snug, tight fit that they don't need anything else. The guns are all set at a certain pressure, and they have just experience of doing it over again. When they stick that thing in there, they know how to hold it tight, hit it real quick, pull it out, and you get a perfect cheat line. How they do that, when I can't even hardly do that using a piece of tape and burnishing it down, but they do. And I imagine that mold they're using probably costs as much as a manufacturing mold, because it's got to go thousands and thousands of times. And you have to realize that mold is only good for that one type of locomotive in that one paint scheme. So they've got to make one for every different locomotive, every different rail car, and every different marking. And that's a heck of a library of paint molds to have made of brass, and they got to keep it all straight, because model, as you guys I'm sure keenly aware, railroad modelers are every bit, if not pickier, than regular kit modelers. And I forget, no, that's the wrong number, that series of number. And the knowledge they have about railroad operations is beyond a lot of people that work for the railroad. And I'm not joking on that. A lot of people who work at a railroad, to them, it's because for the first group, it's a hobby. If you work at the railroad or if you work for the airline, you know what you work on. This is your job. You do it and go home. But the guy who's a hobbyist who's into it, he learns all the extraneous that goes on outside of that. When I worked at Presidential Airways as a bag smasher, that was my first job in the airline business, was tossing bags on the ramp at Dulles Airport. And we had 6 737s. I'm sorry, we're down to 1 737. We had 6 Bach 146s, and we had about a dozen Jetstream 31s and 32s, little turboprops, and then we had a couple of Beech 1900s, which are actually the only ones we owned. The rest were leases. I went out on the ramp my first day at work, and I was stunned because we had our dozen or so Jetstreams out there, but only 3 of them were in presidential colors. 2 were in Eastern Metro, a couple were in just like corporate paint schemes, and then United Express, and all of a sudden I was like, what's going on here? Are these all, and I thought, well, I'll go over to the presidential planes. They're ours. And I know these are all ours. Well, the Eastern Metro planes were contracted from Eastern Metro. They were ACMI, Aircraft Crew Maintenance Insurance. So they're basically wet leases. They came complete with crews. They were contracted by us to fly some of our routes. Apparently, the airline had been a United, well, we were still a United Express. But at one point, they'd been flown as presidential, so a lot of the planes were in presidential markings. When we got the United Express contract, United Express wanted all the planes painted in their colors, but they only got a handful of them done. And so we had like 12 planes flying under about 6 different liveries. There's 6 different paint schemes. It was a nightmare. And the guys who worked there, because I'm an airline person, I was interested. I went and talked to the supervisor, and he gave me the whole story. This plane did this. So I knew the story behind each airplane and why it was painted the way it was. You talk to one of the regular rampers, all they knew was put it in tail number. The bags go in tail number this. That's it. They didn't even know what kind. They knew it was a Jetstream because we told them. They couldn't tell a 31 from a 32. They couldn't, they knew that 18 bags can go back there, and that's it. And 12 can go in the belly, and that's it. So people who work in industry often know less about it, than a lot less about it, except for maybe a few of the nuts and bolts things, than the people who are like industry people. And I was the only one that knew our 737 was in a Key Airlines paint scheme, even though it said presidential across the top. It was literally just painted over in black, presidential. And I asked them, is that a Key Airlines paint scheme? Like, ooh. And about the 4th person asked, oh, yeah, we wet leased it from them. It was an old 100. Oh, that thing was it. We had to, didn't even have APU. We had to blow start it every time. And in that Model 7.3, the attach point for the high pressure air to spool the engines from a ground start is under the center of the airplane between the engines. So one of us geniuses had to crawl under the airplane. You hooked it up in advance, but when they got an engine started, no, actually they usually started both of them right there. They did air assist on both of them, although they could do a cross bleed. But they got them both going. We had to unhook the thing, close the panels. Now we had to get past those motors. And of course, you weren't supposed to walk in front of them. And you weren't supposed to walk behind them. I'm like, what am I going to do? Crawl under it? And this is an old 100. Those engines almost hang on the ground. So we had to go all the way out to the nose gear with it, or all the way to the tail, dragging this hose and everything. And it was a mess. But that was the way we operated, is what we did. So those are the kinds of nuts and bolts things a person who works in the business would know, because they do it daily. But you ask them about where the airplane came from, or they don't know. And a hobbyist knows 10 times as much about that stuff as they do. Of course, this comes in with the models. A lot of you guys who are into whatever, whether it's cars, planes, trains, doesn't matter. You probably have a much broader knowledge than a lot of the people who actually operated the equipment. unless they also have Newfound. An example that you'll see is when this is done and I put up when I put up the video on all the Aurora airplanes, Mark talks about each one of them. This plane was popular for this. This plane was unpopular for that. Now, I've never flown a World War I aircraft, but I'll guarantee you, he knows more about all of them in general than, say, some young lieutenant who actually flew one of them. Because I guarantee you, some guy who flew a SE-5 didn't know diddly about a Sopwith triplane. And there was no internet back then. Well, that was a ramble and a half. All right, now time to read some comments and see what we got going on here. Yeah, railroaders are perfection. I hang around the railroad club long enough to know that. Oh my God. The thing is when everybody is that guy, they kind of cancel each other out. I ain't putting ditch lights on my N-scale SD40s. Got to finish. Oh, sorry, Richard. Well, take care. Now, you see, Mark, you would know probably, you would be the kind of the go-to guy because since you're a retired railroader and a model railroader, you got both ends covered. It's like me in the airlines. You know, I work in the airlines, I jump seat on other airlines. I've seen their techniques. I talk to the crews. I learn a lot about how they do things. I know how we do things. And since I'm an airline geek, you know, I can give you the broad picture. And my library over here is covered in flying the line 1, flying the line 2, deregulation knockouts 1 and 2. I mean, just, you know, Sky Gods, the history of Pan American, Hard Landings by Petzinger, you know, the whole Eastern, the dogfight over Airbus, all that stuff. So, guys, yeah, even to fly one of those airplanes, never mind go out and get shot at in one. But I think the movie The Blue Max, if there's any one thing it does justice to, as dangerous as flying back then was, when you look at life in the trenches, you know, Stockel starts off in the trenches looking up and, well, that's the way to fight a war, you know, and like, well, you know, everything, those days getting out of bed was dangerous. I have not had a chance to get to Rhinebeck, and I would love to. And the thing about Rhinebeck Aerodrome, for those that don't know, is a lot of the airplanes are some of the last originals left. And of course, Kermit has a lot of the modern replicas, but they're very authentic, so they have a lot of the bugs that the originals had. Unfortunately, the company down in, I think it's New Zealand that was making them, ran into a bit of a scandal a while back. And as most scandals go, it was about money, and I don't think they're making airplanes anymore, which is sad because apparently they made some really nice replicas. And they were real replicas. I mean, they weren't, yeah, it looks kind of like, I mean, they were genuine replicas. Nice try, Maurice. Let's see. Christopher Lee is Dracula. You know, there's a kit somebody should make. I mean, everybody does the Bela Lugosi. Why hasn't no one's done a Christopher Lee Dracula kit? I bet that would be popular. Get some of the characters, some of those old Hammer films and everything. That would be. I'll bet you that would have a very popular following. And Lord knows, they've made every Godzilla that was ever put out and several King Kongs. So, well, actually, kit model, they only have that Aurora kit that I'm aware of. But, heck, even Lindbergh put out a Godzilla, and Atlantis, I think, just cut the molds for a new one. Plus, they got the original molds. SOE, Special Operations, it was a Special Operations Executive. If there's any one thing that the English have mastered, it's giving things really cool names. I mean, calling basically a spy slash, well, not terrorist, but you know, an organization that, a special operations executive. I mean, that is just a cool name for what's basically a, well, let's call it what it is, a spy and terror outfit. Yeah, we're subtle carnage, and we'll call it the, you know, we're going to go out and do all kinds of skullduggery and nastiness and we're going to be a league of misbehavior. We're going to call it the Special Operations Executive. Went to Rock Life in Ottawa with my brother. I had to walk away because I had been moved over from agriculture. Oh, yeah. Yeah, British. I'm sorry. We had a short-lived, well, it lasted a couple of seasons, a television show over here called Sleepy Hollow. And the first season was really good, but apparently it borrows from the old Ichabod Crane story in The Headless Horseman. And it's a supernatural show. But suppose Ichabod Crane is a soldier from the Revolutionary War era, was brought back to life in modern-day Sleepy Hollow, New York. And so much of it is hilarious. He's constantly correcting people for historical inaccuracies. And one of them, he goes to a museum. They're talking about Paul Revere. And he talks about, he says, the British are coming. And he's like, my God, man, we were all British back then. He's like, it's like, like the redcoats are coming or the soldiers are coming or something. We didn't call them British. We were all British back then. And it wasn't Revere that did it. And he goes on to make all these corrections. It's pretty funny. History geeks love it. Probably the best one was when he sees he pulls out the police officer bringing him some donuts or donut holes, and he's reading the receipt, and he sees the sales tax. He goes, a 10% levy on baked goods. My God, we must do something about this. Why are there not riots in the street? Yeah, I was like, yeah, America could use a little more of that attitude these days. But that was filmed in North Carolina. Okay. Yeah, they do a lot of filming down here in Jacksonville too. Of course, all the special effects and everywhere. So, but actually, the popular place for doing a lot of filming is Canada, for obvious reasons. It's less expensive. A lot of television shows are shot in Canada. A lot of movies and TV shows are also shot any place but California and New York. And you can shoot in, was it Heat of the Night and Smoking the Bandit were all shot in Georgia, I think, and down here in Florida is pretty cheap. And, but the thing is, if I was going to be in the movie business, one of the things I'd love to be in is models, which really aren't used that much anymore. And that's why I love that series, A Sense of Scale, because it gets into so many things, and you realize that a lot of the talent's being lost. One of the things I had to associate when I did the diorama, although when I did some of the close-ups, I realized maybe I got a little too free with this, but I didn't put a lot of detail into the characters because they were going to be shot at distance. And one of the things I took away from that is when you're shooting whether it's a TV show or the kind of thing I was doing, especially when you got 50 or 100 figures like I'm working with, every bit of detail that can't not be picked up on camera is a waste. And if the camera can't see it, or it's on a side that the camera's not going to see, why bother? One side of the Enterprise on Star Trek didn't even have markings on it. When they reversed it, what they would do is they had more or less a glorified sticker that would reverse the number, and they would flip it around, and it would film the same side with the number on backwards. The NCC 1701 was on backwards, and then they would just reverse the film. And that's why you occasionally see the Enterprise going the other way, but only one side was ever shot. And although a few of those close-ups were like, yeah, maybe I should have detailed the faces a little more. And especially when the characters like mine were supposed to be grimy and, a few days of dirt and filth on them, so you splash on a little bit of black wash and everything, a little mud. Given the way the camera picks it up, it's perfect. And Hallmark movies take place in New York, Boston. Yeah. But Mike, the nice thing about that, of course, is that Canada has a similar climate to the northern cities. New York and Boston, Chicago, Seattle, and whereas if you're trying to shoot something that's taking place in Texas in the winter, Canada's going to have a hard time filling in. That's when they come to Florida, or actually go to Texas, which would probably be cheaper. But the Jacksonville, where I live, it still is, and was very popular, but not only because it's dirt cheap to shoot here. There are hundreds of extras available for $50 a day. I was in a couple of movies that were shot here, and I just, ahead in the crowd. But, they give you craft services lines, everybody, and they had military organization. I was in First Time Felon, which was done by Rock Dutton. You guys remember the TV show Rock, or if you saw Well, anyway, you guys probably know who Charles S. Dutton is. But anyway, the point is that it was run like a military operation. Like when craft services was time for lunch, man, there were about 100 of us, and they just lined us up, and we all ate in 30, 45 minutes. And surprisingly good, better than any of the food I had in the Army. Then it was everybody back, first position, boom, everybody's action, everybody start walking. Even college films are shot here because there's so many out of work actors. Everybody in Florida like California's a wannabe actor. And they'll go out and do a college film just to have something to stick on a resume. Yeah, I was in, Face of God. And here in Jacksonville, we've got the swamps, we've got the beaches, we've got the downtown area. And when you're not showing a skyline, when you're just showing a street in any city can be a street in any city. And we were supposed to be in, I forgot, I think it was Chicago. They made Jacksonville like Chicago with surprising ease because we have a built-up downtown area, but you drive 10, 15 minutes, you're out in the sticks. 20 minutes to the east, you're at the beach. Pretty much any direction for 10 minutes, you're in the swamps or the woods. The only thing we don't have around here is desert. And they filmed a lot of G.I. Jane out here. And they went down to Camp Blanding to shoot a bunch of it. Apparently the Navy read the script, and they were like, nah, we're not helping with this movie. So Clinton was president back then, so the producer called Clinton and said, listen, the military won't help us with this movie. Can you help us out? And Lawton Childs was the Democratic governor of Florida back then, so he said, yeah, come on, I'll have the National Guard help you out. And since that belonged to the state, to the governor says, hey, can you help these people out? Yes, sir. And so even though it was supposed to be Navy training, and the one reason they shot in Jacksonville is, if you watch the movie, you're going to see the Navy base in the background, but it's actually shot at a city park across the river from, I think it was Mayport. So although that is actual naval activity in the background, they're on a civilian park where they'd set up a boot camp and everything. And that was how they pulled that off. And all the helicopters and everything, if you'll notice, they're not the right model. They're all civilian helicopters, and they were painted with paint that was mixed with future floor wax so they could be hosed off. And in fact, I know one of the guys that was out there with the tape and everything, putting with the black mixed future floor wax, putting Navy on the side of the I think it was an H3, and that was mostly shot at Craig Field, which is where I used to flight instruct. So there you go. By the way, Mike, what films did your wife, was she in or did she make? Maybe we can, watch some holiday movies or something. If you said there were holiday movies. Yeah, Exile's done in Vancouver. They actually shot part of a movie called Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for the Memories, Julie Newmar, in my hometown of Quincy, Florida, which I guarantee you'd have trouble finding on a map. It's 20 miles west of Tallahassee. And there was a restaurant that is, and they painted something in the window like the name of the restaurant. And after, they're only there a few days. They also did, they shot some of the movies Something Wild in that area. It's supposed to be in Pennsylvania, but it's shot in the Panhandle of Florida, most of it in my hometown. Man, you talk about a place that's dirt cheap to shoot a movie. Anyway, the people who owned the building where they painted the name of the restaurant, they left that up there for years. In fact, I don't think they took down to the building, changed hands. They were so proud of that. We was in a movie. Oh, Maurice, not only was Sequest DSV shot down in Orlando, but I actually was personal friends with one of the regular extras. See what? I don't know if he would qualify as a featured extra. He was also, he had some dialogue in that movie. Oh, gosh. About I'm forgetting the name of it. It was like a family film. He's the same guy that played, not my friend, but Arnold Vorlus, who played the Mummy, played the Heavy in that movie, and I forget the name of it. But about like a dog that forms a relationship with a dolphin. Anyway, well, he was a regular extra on Sequest DSV, and he had one of the ball caps with the logo. And they count the props there very carefully. I mean, like, well, they knew the show was going out of production. And he's like, hey, can I keep the hat? And he was like, no, we got to count for all this stuff. The thing cost like $3. So he's like, yeah, I understand. And he was getting ready to leave, and I think they shut the last one, and the props manager like, psst, come here, and tossed it to him. Stick it in your shirt, get out of here. So he got to keep that, and that was one of his prized possessions. And the make-believe of the movies. It's always disappointing when you see the exciting movie, and then you see them without all the special effects, and their weapons are just sitting there with a light bulb on the end going flicker, 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 because it's the battery touch. And all it does, of course, give the special effects guy a mark to put in the laser beam or whatever. Oh, okay. Okay, Mike, I gotcha. Yeah. But the holiday movie I want to see is the one at the beginning of the movie Scrooge with Bill Murray with Lee Majors, The Day the Reindeer Died. Now that's one I'd go see. World War Z was in Glasgow. Okay. Yes, John, Always was a remake of an old film with Van Johnson called A Guy Named Joe. And Spencer Tracy played the Dreyfus character who's killed attacking a German aircraft carrier, mind you. And, of course, it was made during the war. And I think it's Ward Bond plays Al Yaki, and Van Johnson plays the Brad Johnson character. And I forget who played the girl in it, but and it's basically the same story, only instead of going to get rescue firemen, she's going to with a P-38 to attack a Japanese target, and she does what has to be the single most successful strafing run in the history of aviation. But and they're flying P-38s instead of bombers. But I still enjoyed the movie, and of course they did that movie had a lot of model work in it. And it's fair to say, though, that part of the beginning of the Catalina scooping up the water as it's heading towards the guides on the boat is classic Spielberg, and still one of Hollywood's better stunts, because even though they're all stuntmen and professional pilots, that's the kind of thing that can get out of hand in a hurry. The airplane could hit something in the water, it could cough an engine or anything. That's a more dangerous stunt than it looks like. If any of you guys want to model something really that is deceptively dangerous, here's a thought for you. If you've seen the movie Catch-22, which is a sort of a dark comedy about how, well, you guys are all familiar with Catch-22, I'm sure. Anyway, it's a lot of people still say to this day it's the single most dangerous stunt ever done in Hollywood. Now I have to remember they got a full squadron of like 16 B-25 Mitchells, and a lot of these planes were, I wouldn't say derelicts, but they hadn't flown in a long time. They had to get all these planes together. They had to get them all in flying condition. They had to get the crews trained up. And it's not like in the 70s when this movie was made, there were B-25 crews around every corner. So they get everybody, not only Platoon was shot in England, I think so was Full Metal Jacket. Yeah, it's amazing how well they can make England look like Vietnam. Anyway, yeah, the B-25s were filmed. That's correct. They went down to Mexico, and I think one of the reasons they went to Mexico to do this, well, one, it had the airfield, the runway by the beach that they needed, but also I think they wanted to do it without the FAA breathing down their necks. But all of them take off together. I mean, there's like a 2-second roll, and they had all 16 of them going down the runway at one time. Now, I actually read a rather in-depth article about this. The B-25s, when they had the pilot briefing, they were told point blank, if you're on the runway and you lose an engine or an engine loses power, don't try to recover the plane. Bury the outside rudder, get it out of the way, because you got everyone else piled up behind you. The only exception would have been the trail aircraft. Pile and Jugger, that was Full Metal Jacket. So anyway, if one, especially one of the lead aircraft, had smoked an engine, blown a tire, whatever, and remember, these things were put together with the parts that were available. It's not like there's a new B-25 Mitchell's parts store, and they could put shiny new engines on every one of them. And depending on how you want to believe, some of these airplanes were still in fairly questionable condition. But he said if somebody coughed a motor, they would have just had to pile up. And you're talking about 16 airplanes with at least 2 or 3 guys in each one. So you could have had a lot of death and destruction. And, but it went off, and it's actually some very impressive film footage. But which, as anyone knows, the military did not take their planes off like that. They went off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, that's just not how they did it. And they formed up in the air. But it is some impressive footage. And I got to give them props for that, literally. But if you wanted to make an interesting diorama, because people do like the Doolittle Raiders, like, no. They took off one at a time. They were just taking off an aircraft carrier. Compared to what they did in Mexico, that wasn't even that particularly dangerous. I mean, if a plane had a problem, it would have been that one plane. This was a chance to pile up an entire squadron. I think put 16 of those things on a dirt runway by a beach in Mexico with all the smoke and dust and everything going out behind them. That would make an interesting little diorama. All of them moving down the runway at the same time. And you can label it Danger, Will Robinson. Yeah, I'm sure they were on instruments. According to what I read, one of the other problems they had was, although airplanes like that don't generate a lot of wake turbulence, they do generate a lot of prop wash. And since this is something I have some personal experience with, let me tell you a brief story. I'm landing my jet on runway 23 at Charlotte and coming in behind a Dash 8 turboprop. And it left what we call dash trash. Now, the airplane, the dash, does not put out a lot of wake. It's a slow-moving airplane, comes in relatively flat. But those gigantic four-bladed props out there are swirling up the air. I'm in a jet that weighs half again as much, coming in substantially faster. And at the last second, I caught that dash trash, and I almost buried a wingtip. I went full deflection the other way on the yoke and was able to keep it. And I mean, it was an instinctive reaction. I never even gave it a conscious thought. It was like, whoa! And it just, and as soon as I did it, I went right back to center because I could have just easily gone over the other way. But no, there would have been no time for engine spool or anything to go around. And this happened 4 or 5 feet off the ground. I mean, I'm in the flare. Whoa! And thin margin. It just so happened that there was no crosswind, so nothing to blow it off the runway, and it was a fairly still air day, and that's kind of bad because it kind of just sits there and swirls. There's no wind to move it or break it up, and there you go. So for the guys flying those B-25s, they're taking off in the prop wash of all these planes. That's going to the prop wash of other planes. So those rear-end guys, not only they got nothing but dust in the windshield, but my God, it had to be choppy. And you see them in the formation doing this. So that was, it's no small miracle that some kind of catastrophe didn't take place. And they did have a crash on the set. And I've read this, I can't verify it, but apparently the scene where 2 of them are walking by and you see the B-25 go zipping down the runway, landing in the background, and you hear the explosion, their hats blow off or whatever. And they just keep doing their part. Apparently, I've heard that was actually a real mishap. But they just kept the cameras rolling. I can't verify that, because, Hollywood, they live for their BS. But that certainly sounds, how can I put it? I certainly wouldn't rule it out. And yeah, the book is, well, the thing about the reason the book's better than the movie is because books can go into a great deal of detail and tell you what people are thinking. But tell me Orson Welles was not perfectly cast as that grubby general. We all know the scene I'm talking about. Take this man out and have him shot. What do you mean I can't shoot who I want him? A general. Yeah, I had general in the wrong army. Yeah, I can believe it. Let's just say, DeCam, when I got out of that airplane, the seat cushion came with me. Oh yeah, Hell's Angels. Well, back when Hughes was making those movies, there was no safety. I mean, now, since you brought that up, one airplane that would make a cool model is Hughes XF-11. That was an impressive airplane. It just happened to come out. They did actually, the Air Force did get a handful of them with regular props on them. They were really pushing piston engine technology. And the Hell's Angels situation, and the Flight of the Phoenix situation, and a lot of them were just because when you're flying on the edge like they are, there are so many little things, and when you think about it, it's little things that cause a lot of these mishaps, like the Flight of the Phoenix, where Paul Mance was killed. We're talking about they had done. The movie was wrapped. They were just getting insurance footage because back, in those days, and I guess they still do. You shoot it several times in case one's out of focus or it goes out of camera frame. You want to have a couple. And this was like the last or next to the last one they were going to do, and there just happened to be a little rise in the ground that, and Mance had just been there, but he just happened to catch it, and the vibration snapped the airplane, and over she went, and it just happened just that fast. But yeah, it was the photo recon thing with the twin booms, like a giant P-38 that Hugh was flying, and if he'd stayed to the flight profile and come back when he was supposed to, they probably would have found the leak, and there wouldn't have been a problem, because he was Howard Hughes, and as far as I'm concerned, highly overrated as a pilot. He did so much crap that was dangerous. And depending on whose stories you want to believe, he got some people killed. I'm not a big... I admire what Hughes did in business and that he promoted aviation, but as a pilot, I'm not impressed. And then of course, apparently when it did happen, he didn't handle it very well. If he'd shut that engine down, he might have been able to save it because it was actually producing reverse thrust when that thing, went went in reverse on him, and we didn't take the power away from it. But I've numerous people who had flown with him. I mean, when he would go off, decide he wanted to fly one of TWA's airplane, they always put what's his name in the left seat? The guy who was running it, was it Jack Fry? Because he's about the only person that could handle Howard, because he knew not to let him go with an airplane. Anyway, if time's available, more takes, more coverage, amortize the cost. Oh, that's a thought. It's true, yeah. So getting back to XF-11, when that thing crashed, I still can't believe he survived that. But it was sad part was an airplane that had a great deal of potential, but it really came out too late to have any effect, and also it would have gotten fielded too late even if they had gotten the bugs worked out of it. But it just happened to be coming out on the cusp of jets, which of course were the future. And but the people who did fly the later versions that had the normal engines, it's actually a very nice flying plane, a lot of potential. I do like that they covered it in the movie The Aviator. I think they did a fairly honest telling of the story, at least from what I could tell, from what little I know about it. But that is an interesting airplane. That would look good on the shelf. When you really think about it, when you look at that airplane, it's very grand, standing on tall gears and everything, very, very sleek. It really looks the part of the late war spy plane. I mean, it's a proto U-2. I mean, you can look at it in a U-2 and sort of see a kindredness in there. And anyway, that was it was what it was. Yeah, the Intex Spruce Goose was, I forget who made it. They were using somebody else's molds. With only a handful of exceptions, all of Intex's models were previously owned, and that was their modus operandi. Of course, they'd actually kicked off in electronic toys, and that's kind of where they went. No, that's right. The Hercules was not made of spruce. I think I forget what it was made of, ash or something. But again, they said they could have that thing flying sooner if Howard would have quit meddling with it. But he was always out there, change this, change that. And the tragedy is, I don't know how much tonnage we could have saved by putting stuff on aircraft that could have, a big cargo plane like that. But the Liberty ships, which are themselves miraculously simple and incredible vehicles, that they were able to do what they did, but given the number of... oh, okay, Mike. I'm going to send you an email later. And, we'll post a box art color video. Oh, that's perfect. Good. That's what I was wondering about. I've got to ask you some questions about color. Well, Mike, take care. Birch, that was it. Thank you. Birch. Gosh, it was bugging me. But if we had a fleet of those things, I'm wondering how much tonnage we could have saved, because a lot of our stuff ended up on the bottom thanks to those U-boats. Of course, for that matter, if we could have come up with the Akrana plan. Well, speaking of going, guys, we have a cat that has an appointment with the vet. So I'm going to put the intro, I'm going to loop the intro video, the Exodus video up here, because I know a lot of you guys want to chat with each other, and I'll leave this going for a while. I want to thank everybody for checking in with me, and we'll see what happens if maybe we can do it again next week. And it seems we're going to make it out of plastic. Well, guys, take care, and thanks for tuning in.
No one would have believed in the middle of the 20th century that human affairs were being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's. Yet, across the gulf of space, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded our Earth with envious eyes, slowly and surely drawing their plans against us. It did not occur to mankind that a swift fate might be hanging over us, or that from the blackness of outer space we were being scrutinized and studied, until, during a pleasant summer season,
by the third day of the calamity, those fortunate enough to have been sufficiently far away from the initial attacks fled the devastation of their once great cities for the temporary refuge of the mountains and prairies, swamps and woodlands. As the roads and highways became littered with abandoned vehicles, as fuel was exhausted and bridges destroyed, people crowded the remaining transportation or simply walked. But they continued their trek away from the invaders. Eventually, informal convoys formed. This is the story of one such caravan. As some remnants of the population of the Los Angeles basin made their way eastward into the foothills, a small National Guard detachment and a few remnants of local law enforcement managed to keep some semblance of order. The policemen, in their now tattered uniforms, did their best to present a professional police presence to help reassure the survivors that society had not collapsed and that civility was still required of all. The military detachment was made up of Marines who had orders to recover tanker trucks with their now precious cargo of gasoline. As they sought refuge away from the nightmarish sounds of the battle just across the mountains, they slowly made their way through the mountain roads. But their course, which had initially simply been one of immediate escape, was no longer a random one. For military minds, which were as cool and calculating as those of the attackers, had also been watching, and their observations would soon bear fruit. But for now, the people drove or rode or simply walked away from the terrifying sounds. As a father tries to reassure his terrified children in the back of a truck, he tells them of how he once saw such things as he marched across France in 1944, and told them not to despair, for once the madness had ended, life eventually returned to normal in that faraway land. But he also quietly wondered if France was now also under attack. A mature couple, still looking dignified despite their now tattered clothes, continued to walk with their heads held high. A passenger of a truck stands by, ready to fend off any ruffians who may try to take over their precious transport. A lone man clings to the back of a truck, while others simply ride alongside total strangers with no idea where to go or what to do next. And others simply keep walking. Among the refugees were military aviation personnel that were ordered to flee their stricken airbase after the last of their aircraft were destroyed, their commanders hoping to preserve the skills each man had for a possible future fight. An auto mechanic helps keep an old farm truck going, and his skills are now amongst the most important of all. Each person in this exodus has been ripped away from the story that was their life by an unknown attacker whose face no one has even seen. At best, perhaps a glance at the horrific weapons that attack them. Were they aliens? Demons of the supernatural? Perhaps it was the Russians, or even angels venting God's wrath on a decadent world. Nobody knew, but everybody wondered. Hungry, tired, dirty, and terrified, they moved along with an almost drone-like demeanor. Whatever meager possessions they had on their persons was now all they had left. Military and civilians intermingled, usually offering each other what little aid and comfort they could. As they entered a large clearing, they were horrified by a new sight. The burnout remains of a small roadside motel, its inhabitants vaporized by the attackers. Clearly the attackers had already been here and moved on, but would they return? Then, although startling at first, there was the comfortingly familiar sound of a helicopter overhead. Its staccato chatter echoed off the valley walls as it settled into a clearing in front of them. Out of it stepped a small team of men, including 2 military policemen and a distinguished-looking middle-aged man in a perfect uniform. Perhaps these men had some morsel of information for the haggard mass, for everyone craved information as much as they needed food and water. A few of the military officers and policemen went forth to speak with these men from the helicopter. The man in charge was a National Guard 2-star general, and he did have much to say. The military, finding its weapons useless against such technology and having realized its inability to stave off this destruction, expanded its mission, prioritizing aiding and directing the seemingly countless caravans of shocked and exhausted people. They commandeered as many strategic assets as they could find, mostly food, fuel, and medicine. With the regular armed forces still valiantly trying to slow the advance of the attackers, the National Guard was assigned the task of aiding an expected tidal wave of refugees. The mission in this area was under command of the general who stood before them. An architect by profession, this bespectacled man understood the need for clear, calm thinking and organization. He began setting up remote way stations with very basic medical facilities, food and water distribution, and fuel for the few vehicles that had made it thus far. With the aid of whatever civilian law enforcement could be mustered, he quickly arranged for a system to be set up. The police, backed up by the military, would direct and control the civilian population. His hope was that the use of civilian police would help reassure the people and add some small modicum of normalcy in the minds of the survivors. As more people told their stories and more observations were made, a picture began to emerge. The invaders, for all of their immense intellect and technology, were prone to predictable patterns. The military commanders may have lacked the weapons to defeat their enemies, but their strategic minds were finding deep flaws in the attackers' plan. In time, it was revealed that these mysterious agents of destruction were not operating like an invasion force by taking and holding ground, but more like an exterminator trying to wipe out an infestation. Once they had sanitized an area, they moved on, never to return. The general decided the best way to save lives was to find areas that the attackers had already been through and establish camps there. As a result, people were sent that way and the military supported them as best it could. Since it was abundantly clear that the attackers had already been through this area, it was decided that this would be the best place to make camp. Supplies were trucked in here and at other remote outposts along the ever-expanding river of refugees. Connected by radio, these outposts also served as collection points for information and intelligence. Food and water were quickly distributed, supplies collected and guarded, and minor improvements were made to the last standing structure to be used as an aid station. Communications were set up, and patrols were sent out to scout the area, as well as forward observation posts to give early warning should the attackers return. The food and water, along with the badly needed rest, buoyed the people's spirits. The semblance of order and structure gave them comfort, and the sight of low-flying fighter jets streaking towards the battle gave them hope. There were many pilots in their group who could not help but notice that they did not see all of the planes return. As night fell, People slept in their clothes with their shoes on, lest they be required to flee on short notice. Despite their fatigue, sleep came with difficulty, for during the night, the sounds and eerie lights of the battle across the mountains raged on. Men's imaginations had to be reined in, as every flash of light seemed to briefly illuminate a nightmare. Sleep came with the darkness, and darkness came with the sleep. Early the next morning, the word came. The decision was made to use the bomb. The idea of using the atomic bomb on American soil had seemed inconceivable only a few days before. Scientists had discovered another weakness in the attackers, and it was not the blast, but the EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, that was output from an atomic blast. They thought that this would destroy the attackers, or at least their machines. Los Angeles, virtually annihilated at this point and still a major area of concentration for the attackers, was chosen. There was also a fear that if this failed, that once the attackers were finished sanitizing the city, they may return to the mountains to follow up on their work. So people would not be safely sheltered by the mountains. Ergo, the order was given for them to face east until after the blast. Many of them sought cover wherever they could find it. It would be some time before the results of the atomic bomb blast could be determined, so the people should be made ready to move in case the bomb was to fail. Vehicles were fueled and loaded with what provisions could be mustered. The people were warned and prepared, and then it was time.
Attention, stand by. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It took some time for the sound to reach the mountains. Once the blast had cleared, everyone mounted the vehicles prepared to move out. Had the bomb worked? Then the radio calls slowly began to come in. The machines fell, never to rise again, but all was not secure. Since the people could not return yet, the decision was made to set up the local stations as refugee camps while the military assessed the situation. But at least a further evacuation would not be required. It was learned that aside from the radiation, a new threat was looming. The attackers' ships had failed, but many of the attackers, scared and hungry, had begun fighting outside of their vehicles. Rumors circulated of the zombified dead being reanimated to fight humans. Other rumors spread about giant monsters, like the one Russia had unleashed on Germany in 1946. There were even wilder rumors of mutated sea creatures ravaging the city, Other stories claimed there were mutated zoo animals on the loose that had fled into the woods and upwards toward the mountains. And all of this was made worse by every manner of terrifying sound that pierced the following night's sky. The explosions of bombs and artillery continued throughout the night as the army kept up its fight in the city. Terrifying shadows reflected on the clouds above the city, which was now a hellscape. Rumors and imaginations ran wild. The outposts were fully manned and a defensive perimeter tightened. But the night passed with little more than frayed nerves and wild imaginations. At daybreak, more assets eventually joined the camp. A helicopter reconnaissance dispelled the stories of giant monsters and zombies in the streets, but the aliens were still fighting as foot soldiers. There were battles still being fought in the city, but this was a threat the military could fight. Yet there was one constant fear that the attackers may break through and follow the exodus of refugees into the hills. The camp was reinforced as much as humanly possible. The battle against the attackers could be heard echoing throughout the next night as well. Everyone had a finger by the trigger. But within the week, the days had become routine and the nights were becoming ever more quiet, eventually having little more than the chirping of crickets. It was over, and we had won. The guns eventually grew silent, and the word was sent that the enemy was defeated. The radiation levels outside the hot zone were low enough for human occupation, and the enemy had been totally neutralized. People could return home, or to what was left of it. But there was another threat waiting for them upon their return. Without a working government and no infrastructure, the people had to be on guard to protect themselves from themselves.